In McKinney, Texas, Friday nights were sacred. The glow of stadium lights, the roar of the crowd, the sound of a brass band echoing across cool night air. This was life in North Texas. Football wasn't just a game here, it was a ritual. It gave the small town its rhythm, its pride, and its heroes. The people of McKinney would say, if it's Friday night, you're at the Bulldogs game. Stores closed early, neighbors packed the stands, and for a few hours every week, everyone was united by one thing, the McKinney North Bulldogs. But in March 2004, that unity was shattered. That month, a crime so brutal would cut through the heart of this football town. A quadruple murder that would leave families destroyed, players dead, and the entire community questioning how well they truly knew the people next door. McKinney was the picture of suburban peace. Just north of Dallas, it offered what many Texans wanted: city convenience wrapped in small town charm. Wide streets lined with white fences, tidy lawns, and friendly smiles. It was a growing place, one of those Texas towns where everyone still waved to each other, and where the biggest noise most nights came from a backyard barbecue or the distant whistle of a freight train. And at its center was McKinney North High School, home of the Bulldogs, the pride of the town. Coach Sean Pratt had led the team since 2000. To him, the field wasn't just turf and chalk, it was sacred ground. Friday nights here, he said, "You're special. You've got the band, the drill team, the cheerleaders, the fans. It's like the whole town comes alive for those few hours." For many of the players, the Bulldogs were a family. Among them were quarterback Leonard Barbosa, defensive back Austin York, and linebacker Matt Self. Three young men bound by brotherhood, ambition, and an obsession with winning. Matt was the kind of player every coach dreams of: fierce, disciplined, and explosive on the field. Austin was quick, sharp, a natural athlete with a smile that drew people in. And Leonard, the quarterback, was the quiet leader, smart, focused, and born to lead. Those three were the future of the team. Coach Pratt remembered. "I thought they'd be the ones to take us to the playoffs." Leonard's family was just as deeply tied to the Bulldogs as he was. His older brother Mark Barbosa was the team's loudest and most devoted fan. Before his accident, Mark had been a star athlete himself, but an injury had left him paralyzed and confined to a wheelchair. His dreams of football glory ended in an instant. Still, Mark never let it dim his spirit. He became a fixture at the games, his face painted in bulldog blue, his voice booming from the stands. He was the loudest guy there, Leonard's friends said. Everyone knew Mark. After his injury, Mark moved in with his Aunt Rosa Barbosa, a 46-year-old woman known for her kindness and generosity. She lived in a modest single-story home on Trout Street, a quiet neighborhood where the sound of cicadas at night was louder than any siren. Rosa had no children of her own, but she adored her nephews. Her house was their safe haven, the kind of place where you could always find food, laughter, and a sense of calm. She was like a mother to all of us. Leonard's younger brother Robert later said, "If you needed help, Aunt Rosa was there. No questions asked." Robert himself had been staying at Rosa's house temporarily, sleeping on the couch. It was a small home but filled with love, the kind of place that made you feel safe. No one could have guessed that it would soon become a scene of unimaginable horror. It was Friday, March 12, 2004, a normal evening in McKinney. The season was over, but the Bulldogs players still spent their nights together, hanging out, talking about next year, and playing video games. That night, Leonard, his brother Mark, and his two teammates, Matt and Austin, gathered at Rosa's home. The mood was light. They joked, they ate, they argued over the PlayStation. Then, sometime after 9, someone suggested getting pizza. Mark, always hungry, was quick to agree. "Let's go," he said. Matt and Austin offered to tag along. Leonard decided to stay behind. "I'll catch up later," he told them. It was a casual decision, one that would unknowingly save his life. The three friends, Mark, Matt, and Austin, left the house, planning to grab food, and then drop Mark off before heading home. Meanwhile, across town, Sergeant Drew Codell of the McKinney Police Department began his night shift. It was supposed to be a quiet one. McKinney wasn't the kind of place that made headlines for crime. Most calls were minor: shoplifting, noise complaint, the occasional domestic dispute. Around 10:30 p.m., Codell received a call about a possible burglary alarm at a check cashing business downtown. Cliff's check cashing. He responded, found the door unlocked, but saw no signs of forced entry. Probably an employee who forgot to lock up, he thought. He logged the report and prepared to move on. Moments later, his radio crackled again. There'd been a shooting, a multiple-victim shooting, at a house on Truth Street. Codell flipped on his sirens and sped across town. When he arrived, the scene was chaos. In the front yard stood a distraught young man, Robert Barbosa. His voice was broken, desperate. "My brothers are dead," he cried. "They're all dead." Codell rushed inside. Just beyond the doorway, he saw Robert kneeling on the floor, cradling the head of a teenage boy. It was Matt Self. His body was covered in blood, his head split by a gunshot wound. Somehow, miraculously, he was still breathing, shallow, labored breaths. Codell called for an ambulance. Stepping farther inside, Codell saw two more bodies. Austin York was slumped against the wall, dead from a gunshot to the head. Mark Barbosa lay across the bed, his body twisted as if he'd tried to escape. Blood pooled beneath him. He had been shot while trying to run. The smell of gunpowder hung thick in the air. The silence was deafening. Then, in the second bedroom, Codell found Rosa Barbosa. She was face down on the floor. Duct tape covered her mouth and nose. A zip tie was looped around her neck. She had been beaten, tortured, and shot. 4 victims. Codell whispered into his radio. 3 confirmed dead, 1 critical. Even for a veteran officer, it was too much. McKinney had never seen anything like it. Word of the massacre spread through town before sunrise. The names came slowly. First Rosa, then Mark, then the 2 Bulldogs players, Austin and Matt. Coach Pratt woke up to a phone call from one of his players. "Coach," the voice said, trembling. "The boys, they've been shot." Pratt sat in silence for a moment. "Say that again." "They're gone, Coach." He hung up and sat at the edge of his bed, staring at the floor, unable to process the words. "It felt like a bad dream," he later said. "You think, this can't be real. Not here, not them." For the victims' families, the nightmare was just beginning. When Matt's mother, Nancy Self, realized her son hadn't come home by curfew, she knew something was wrong. He was responsible, punctual, the kind of kid who always called if he was running late. Then the phone rang, and a coach's wife was on the line. "Have you heard?" she asked. "Heard what?" Nancy replied. "Matt's been shot." Nancy dropped the phone. Hours later, at the hospital, doctors told her there was nothing more they could do. Her son, the team's heart, her pride, was gone. "I remember holding him," she said softly, "and begging God to wake me up." The community of McKinney reeled. A town built on faith, football, and family suddenly found itself staring into darkness. No one understood how such evil could find its way into their quiet world. And as the crime scene investigators moved through Rosa's home, photographing every drop of blood, collecting every shell casing, one question echoed through every house in McKinney: why? Why would anyone want to kill 4 innocent people? A beloved aunt, 2 teenage boys, and a man in a wheelchair. The answer, when it finally came, would reveal a motive far colder and more senseless than anyone could have imagined. The morning after the massacre, McKinney awoke to the sound of sirens and disbelief. Police tape fluttered in the wind around the Barbosa home on Truth Street. Television vans crowded the curb. The street, that once echoed with laughter and the sound of football practice, was now a crime scene. For investigators, time was critical. 4 people were dead. A killer, or perhaps more than one, was on the loose. The brutality suggested something personal, something fueled by rage or desperation. Detectives from the McKinney Police Department began working through the night. Their first task was to document everything inside the house. Shell casings were scattered across the floor. Blood stained the carpets, the walls, and the bedding. The furniture had been overturned, as if there had been a struggle. It was chaos, one officer recalled, like someone had tried to erase the people who lived there. But nothing appeared stolen. There were no signs of forced entry, no valuables missing. That fact changed everything. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. Whoever had done this had a reason, and they had come prepared. Detective Diana Tilton arrived at the station before dawn. A veteran investigator with a reputation for tenacity. She was known for working cases until she collapsed from exhaustion. Her husband, a state trooper, understood that when she got called to a homicide, she wouldn't be home for days. When I heard there were multiple victims, Tilton said later, I knew the city had lost its innocence. Her first priority was to speak with the man who had discovered the scene, Robert Barbosa, Rosa's nephew and the younger brother of Mark and Leonard. He was the one who'd made the frantic 911 call. Robert was sitting in the interview room when Tilton walked in. His clothes were stained with blood, his eyes red from crying. He could barely speak. I'm sorry, he kept saying. I'm sorry, I didn't know what to do. Tilton's tone was gentle. Just take your time, Robert. Tell me what happened. Robert said he had come home from work late that night. When he walked in, the house was silent. Then he saw Matt and Austin lying on the floor. He ran to his aunt's room, found her bound and unresponsive, checked her pulse, and realized she was dead. When he returned to the living room, Matt was still breathing. That's when he called 911. Tilton listened carefully, but something in his story didn't sit right. His timing was off. According to his account, everything, from entering the house to making the emergency call, should have taken 2 or 3 minutes. But the 911 recording told another story. I've been here for 10 minutes, Robert told the dispatcher on the call. 10 minutes. That was a long gap to explain. Robert, Tilton asked, what did you do during those 10 minutes? He hesitated. I panicked. Tilton pressed him. Did you touch anything? Move anything? He shook his head, but his eyes darted away. When investigators searched the area, they found something curious in a trash can next door. A black garbage bag containing a marijuana plant. It didn't take long to connect it back to Robert. When confronted, he broke down. I didn't want to get in trouble, he admitted. I was on probation. That's why I hid it. I just didn't want the cops to think this was about drugs. Tilton exhaled slowly. That explained the 10-minute delay. Robert had panicked, not from guilt over murder, but from fear of getting caught with marijuana. Still, to be thorough, police tested him for gunshot residue. The results came back negative. He hadn't fired a gun. After several hours of questioning, Tilton was convinced. He wasn't our killer, she said later. He was a scared kid who stumbled into a nightmare. With Robert cleared, investigators turned their attention to the victims. Why had Rosa Barbosa, a gentlewoman with no enemies, been tortured before she was killed? Why duct tape and zip ties? Why so much overkill for someone known for her kindness? It was possible she'd been the target. Tilton began interviewing friends and family, searching for any connection that might explain the crime. Then, one detail changed the direction of the investigation completely. Rosa had recently started a new job. She worked for Cliff's Check Cashing, the same business where Sergeant Codell had responded to a false alarm the very night of the murders. The realization hit investigators hard. It clicked, Tilton said. The burglary alarm came from the check cashing store right before the shooting call. It couldn't be a coincidence. The working theory formed quickly. Rosa's killers had wanted access to the store's cash. They had gone to her house, forced her to hand over the keys and alarm codes, and then executed everyone inside to leave no witnesses. It was a theory born from logic and horror, greed mixed with cruelty. Detectives returned to the check cashing store to look for clues. The door had been left unlocked, just as Codell remembered, but nothing had been stolen. The alarm had likely scared the intruders away before they could reach the safes. Still, there was no forensic evidence. No fingerprints, no shoe prints, nothing. Whoever had been there knew what they were doing. Tilton was frustrated but refused to give up. Then came the first real break. During Rosa's autopsy, the medical examiner carefully removed the duct tape used to bind her face. Stuck to the inner side of the tape was something small, a fragment of latex glove. The lab extracted DNA from the glove piece. It wasn't much, but it was something. If we could find a suspect, Tilton said, we could match this DNA. That could be our smoking gun. The weeks passed with little progress. Then in April, an unexpected lead arrived from inside the Collin County Jail. An inmate named James Jones had been arrested for aggravated kidnapping. On his way to booking, he told officers he had information that could clear up the McKinney murders. I can help you with that case, he said confidently. I know who did it. Jones had worked as a paid informant before. Detectives knew his name and considered him reliable. So when he offered a full confession, the department moved quickly. He claimed that the murders were connected to drugs. According to Jones, one of the people in the Barbosa home was dealing cocaine, and the killings were the result of a dispute over money. He described being inside the house with 2 other men, said they were all drinking beer, and that an argument in the kitchen turned violent. They started shooting, he told investigators. I just ran out. The story was graphic and detailed enough to sound convincing. Police arrested the 2 men Jones had named as accomplices and prepared the case for testing. But as they began checking the facts, cracks appeared. There were no beer cans in the house, despite Jones claiming they were drinking. He didn't know what color the duct tape was. He couldn't describe where Rosa's body was found or what she was wearing. When pressed, his answers fell apart. "You're lying," Tilton said during the interview. "You weren't there." Jones shrugged. "Maybe I didn't see everything." The DNA evidence sealed his fate. Samples from the glove didn't match him or the men he accused. It had been a fabrication. Jones had invented the story, hoping to trade false information for a lighter sentence. "It was a wild goose chase," Tilton said bitterly, "and it cost us precious time." By the time Jones's confession collapsed, months had passed since the murders. Leads were drying up. Public pressure was mounting. McKinney wanted answers. Coach Pratt tried to keep his players focused, but the loss weighed on everyone. When the Bulldogs took the field that fall, the stands were quieter. The team limped to a 2-8 record. It wasn't the same anymore, one player said. The heart was gone. Families of the victims gathered at vigils, lighting candles and praying for justice. But as months turned into years, hope began to fade. Even Tilton admitted that she feared the case might go cold. Then, in her words, "I promised myself, I won't stop until I find them. Someone out there knows the truth." It would take 3 long years before that promise was fulfilled. And when the truth finally emerged, it would come not from a criminal looking for a deal, but from a man haunted by guilt. 3 years had passed since the night McKinney lost its innocence. The yellow police tape was long gone from Trout Street, but the memory of what had happened inside that house refused to fade. For the families, time hadn't healed anything. It had only deepened the void. Every anniversary brought back the same questions. Who could do something so cold? Why those 4? And would justice ever come? Inside the McKinney Police Department, the case file on the Barbosa murders had swollen to the size of a small encyclopedia. More than 500 leads had been investigated and cleared. Detectives had followed tips across Texas, from Dallas to Houston to smaller towns where rumors seemed promising but never led anywhere. By 2006, there was nothing left to chase. The case had all the hallmarks of going cold. But Detective Diana Tilton refused to let it die. She'd poured years of her life into the investigation, missed holidays, and barely seen her husband. Every day she passed by the high school where Matt and Austin used to train, and she couldn't shake the image of their names still written above their locker stalls. Fan 38 Austin York and Faye 34 Matt Self. "I used to look at those lockers," she said later, "and think, just hang on boys. We're not done yet." She was right. In August 2007, more than 3 years after the murders, a woman called the McKinney Police Department. She sounded nervous, almost afraid. "I have information about the Barbosa murders," she told the dispatcher. Detective Tilton picked up the call. The woman explained that her boyfriend had recently confessed something horrifying, that he knew who killed Rosa and the boys. He even admitted that he'd been there. Tilton's heart started pounding. Leads like this almost never came out of nowhere. "What's his name?" she asked. The woman hesitated, then whispered, "Eddie Williams." The Eddie Williams was 25 years old, a drifter with a petty criminal record known for hanging around with the wrong people. Tilton arranged to meet him. But first she had to convince his girlfriend to bring him in. After hours of gentle persuasion, they agreed. When Eddie walked into the interrogation room, he looked tired, resigned, like a man who'd already decided what he needed to do. "You want to tell me why you're here, Eddie?" Tilton asked. He nodded slowly. "I can't live with it anymore," he said. "I was there, I didn't pull the trigger, but I was there." Tilton leaned forward. "Where?" "At Rosa's house." That night, the room went silent. Eddie began to talk. His voice trembled as he recounted the night of March 12, 2004. According to him, the murders had been part of a botched robbery, a plan that started with greed and ended in blood. He said he was recruited by two brothers, Raul and Javier Cortez, who knew that Rosa worked at Cliff's check cashing. The brothers believed she could get them inside the store after hours, where safes full of cash waited. The plan was simple. Go to her house, threaten her, get the keys and alarm codes, hit the store, and leave rich. But nothing went according to plan. Eddie said his job was to knock on Rosa's door and ask if she'd seen a missing puppy, a harmless ruse to make her open the door. When she did, Raul and Javier, wearing ski masks, forced their way in. They shoved her to the floor, Eddie said. Then they locked the door. Eddie claimed he stayed in the living room, frozen, while the brothers dragged Rosa into her bedroom. From there, he heard the sounds. Muffled crying, angry shouting, the thud of fists. They were beating her, trying to get her to give up the alarm code to the check cashing store. She didn't tell them, he said quietly. She wouldn't. Then came headlights through the window. The boys, Mark, Austin, and Matt, had come home. Eddie looked down at the table as he spoke. They walked right into it. He said Raul opened fire immediately, shooting before anyone could react. The gunshots echoed through the house. 1, 2, 3. Mark tried to run but was hit before he could reach the hallway. Austin went down next, then Matt. Rosa was still alive in the back room. When the gunfire stopped, she screamed. Raul and Javier rushed back to silence her. Moments later, Eddie said, it was quiet again. The three men fled with Rosa's keys, jumped into a car, and drove straight to Cliff's check cashing. But when Javier tried to use the keys, the alarm triggered instantly. They panicked and ran, leaving the door unlocked behind them. As Tilton listened, she wanted to believe him. His story matched pieces of evidence they'd never released publicly. The timing of the alarm, the unlocked door, the order of the victims' deaths. But she'd been fooled before. James Jones's false confession was still fresh in her memory. She needed proof. Eddie, she said carefully, how do I know you're not lying to save yourself? He hesitated, then said something that changed everything. You'll find a bullet in the ceiling of Raul's old house, he said. He fired his gun there before we left that night. Same gun he used in the murders. Tilton's eyes narrowed. You're saying the same weapon left a bullet in that ceiling? He nodded. It'll still be there. Detectives immediately obtained a warrant and drove to the address. The current tenant let them in. Eddie had described the living room layout perfectly, down to the couch placement and the color of the walls. He stood right here, Eddie had told them earlier, pointed the gun up and fired. It was the .25 automatic. The ceiling had been patched, but when investigators carefully scraped away the plaster, they found it. A small, deformed bullet lodged deep in the wood beam. They rushed it to the lab. 2 days later, the results came back. The bullet matched the weapon used to kill Rosa and the others. For the first time in 3 years, they had physical evidence linking someone directly to the crime. But Tilton wasn't celebrating yet. One bullet wasn't enough to prove that Raul had been inside Rosa's house. It only confirmed the gun's connection. Then she remembered the DNA. The tiny trace of latex glove stuck to the duct tape from Rosa's face. She compared the sample to Eddie's profile. It didn't match. That meant Eddie had likely told the truth. He hadn't touched Rosa. But if his story was accurate, the DNA should match one of the Cortez brothers. Tilton and her team began surveillance. Raul and Javier Cortez still lived in the area, unaware that the investigation was closing in. Detectives followed them discreetly, waiting for a chance to collect DNA without tipping them off. They didn't have to wait long. One afternoon, Javier flicked a cigarette out his car window. Later that same day, Raul did the same. Crime scene techs swooped in, collected the discarded cigarette butts, and rushed them to the lab. It took only a few days for the results to come back. The DNA on the latex glove from Rosa's duct tape was a match to Raul Cortez. It was over. Tilton closed her eyes as she heard the words she'd waited 3 years for. We've got him. Within hours, the department moved in. Raul and Javier Cortez were taken into custody, along with Eddie Williams. The arrest brought relief, but not triumph. Too many people had been lost. When we got them, Tilton said, it wasn't victory. It was closure, McKinney finally had its answer. The murders on Truth Street weren't random. They weren't revenge. They weren't even personal. They were the result of greed, an amateur robbery that spiraled into mass murder. And as investigators prepared for trial, one final question hung over everyone involved. What punishment could ever equal what these families had lost? The arrests came like a thunderclap. After 3 long years of frustration and grief, the McKinney Police Department finally had its suspects in custody. Raul Cortez, his brother Javier Cortez, and Eddie Williams, the man whose confession had broken the case open. But inside the department, there was no celebration. Not yet. Detective Diana Tilton said it best, when we finally had them, I didn't feel relief. I felt the weight of what we'd lost. The case that had haunted McKinney for nearly 4 years was finally unraveling. Eddie Williams had confessed out of guilt. He told Tilton that he couldn't live with what they'd done. Not after his father's death. My dad's gone, he said quietly during his interview. And I know he sees everything now. I can't keep lying. He knows what I did. Tilton believed him. Eddie's story had led investigators to the bullet in the ceiling, and that bullet had led them straight to Raul Cortez. Then, DNA from the duct tape used on Rosa Barbosa sealed the link. Raul's genetic fingerprint was there, clear and undeniable. Now, Tilton and her team had the evidence they needed. The Cortez brothers were arrested, booked, and interrogated. Raul denied everything. I wasn't there, he said. You've got the wrong guy. Javier, too, kept his mouth shut. I didn't kill nobody, he muttered. But their silence couldn't erase what the forensics had already proven. Raul Cortez was charged with capital murder, a crime that, in Texas, carries the possibility of death by lethal injection. Javier's role was murkier. All police had tying him to the scene was Eddie Williams's statement. Without physical evidence, prosecutors couldn't make a murder charge stick. Still, when they searched Javier's home, they found 3 illegal firearms, 1 stolen, 1 with a scratched-off serial number, and 1 registered to someone else. He also had a stash of marijuana. It wasn't enough to convict him of murder, but it was enough to put him behind bars for a while. He was charged with federal firearms and drug violations and sentenced to 4 years in prison. As for Eddie Williams, the man who'd finally told the truth, his situation was more complicated. He had been there the night of the murders. He had helped plan the robbery. But he hadn't fired a gun, and without him, the case would have remained unsolved. Eddie struck a plea deal with prosecutors. In exchange for his full cooperation and testimony, he received a 20-year sentence for his role in the crimes. For the families, the arrests brought a measure of relief, but also renewed anguish. Nancy Self, Matt's mother, had spent years living in quiet torment, keeping her son's football jersey folded neatly in a drawer.